Today is talk a little bit about the eating scores in LyfeMD. I see it's about a 50-50 split. So some of you, I'm going to keep this a little more general to explain how these principles apply to just everyday eating and anti-inflammatory eating. This is something that's near and dear to my heart because I have an autoimmune condition that can make me very fatigued, very sore and achy. And I've been able to control that largely with nutrition, with how I eat, and then yoga, breathing, mindfulness activities. At one point, I went from being able to run a half marathon to not being able to walk around the block. And over time, I was able to really heal my gut and heal my body with nutrition and these different activities. So it's something that I feel is so important. And that's one of the reasons why we started LyfeMD, is to be able to give other people these types of interventions and not have to wait for them. So as Chelsea mentioned, my name is Dr. Lorian Taylor. I'm a registered dietitian. I did my PhD really around physical activity and behavior change and how to help people make good behavior changes. I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of LyfeMD and was previously a research scientist at the University of Calgary. So LyfeMD is a unique solution. What we've tried to do is we've tried to look at all of the evidence, all of the research that's out there, as well as take into consideration our combined 60 years of clinical experience that we have working with patients with autoimmune disease, and put that all together into the absolute best, most evidence-based programs we could put together. So what we identified is we're doing a lot of, and we still have very active research programs where we're researching these therapies. We started seeing such tremendous impact. And so LyfeMD was born from that because we didn't want patients or our users to have to wait 20 years, because that's how long it typically takes for research, good research, to actually make it into standard clinical practice, where a doctor might tell you some of the things that we're learning about and that we offer in the LyfeMD program. I wanted to just share a brief story of a patient that I had. She was the very first person I ever used our LyfeMD Flare diet with. She was a 49-year-old lady with Crohn's disease that she'd had for 15 years. She also had inflammatory arthritis, and she was getting very limited in her ability to carry out basic tasks. She worked full time. She was looking at having to quit her job. She was already on medication, and she felt like she was starting to flare and that medication wasn't helping her as much as it originally did. She was afraid that she came to me, she was crying. She was afraid she was going to lose her job. She was worried about her 2 boys. And how she was going to be a mom who worked and had this busy schedule. And I've been there. I've totally been there. So within a week of being on our Flare program, she was able to get down on her knees and wash the floor for the first time in a year. After 4 weeks on the program, her inflammatory blood work came back and it had all improved. And she had done nothing other than change her diet and begin to practice breathing and mindfulness activities. So without LyfeMD, she wouldn't have had, in our Flare program, she wouldn't have had access to those evidence-based plans that helped her to implement activities and diet activities that would help her to eat a more anti-inflammatory way. In terms of what we see in our research studies, we are able to help alleviate digestive symptoms by over 90%. When people use our programs, we see significant decreases in anxiety, depression, improved sleep, decreased sitting time, and improved anti-inflammatory food scores over time. So that's some encouragement to stick with the program and use all of the different therapies that we offer in LyfeMD, because they really work together to help you be successful, and also use your coaches. In all of our clinical research studies, every person that's participated in those has participated in them with the support of a coach. And we even see long-term in people who are successful with our programs, almost 100% of them have a coach to help support and answer questions for them. So let's get into the meat of things. So this is an anti-inflammatory food pyramid. We originally published specifically for inflammatory bowel disease, but really it applies to everyone. We published this in Lancet Gastroenterology, I think in 2021. And what this food pyramid does is it tries to break down for you the different priority behaviors. So what that means is we want to maximize the health of the gut microbiome, as well as decrease inflammatory markers that are in your bloodstream that we can test for. So we've tested for these things and looked at how diet affects these things in our research studies. So you'll notice up the left-hand side, you see different priority behaviors. This is how our anti-inflammatory food score works. So what our anti-inflammatory or our score does, our food score in the app, is it takes all of these behaviors and puts them into one questionnaire that we ask you all of these different questions about. And then what we're able to do is identify for you what are the food behaviors that are going to give you and your disease, and the type of disease that you have, the most benefit for your buck. So where do you need to start to be able to see the most benefit with the foods that you're choosing? So that's how our food score works. And it's quite complicated, but I wanted to give you a few examples of where you would get a full, 1 point for your food score. Now, our food score is from 0 to 100. If you're, let's say you get a score of 50%, that means when we make this anti-inflammatory food pyramid practical, you're doing about 50% of the behaviors that will help you reach towards being in a more anti-inflammatory state. Now, when we believe that when you get your score up to about 75% or higher, this means that you will be causing less inflammation, not only in the gut, but in the whole system. Because what happens is all of these foods work together. So it's not just one food. It's not just leafy greens. It's not just fruits and vegetables, but it's not just healthy fats. These foods all work together to then grow that healthy gut microbiome and feed the bacteria in the colon that we want to be fed, because all of those bacteria produce things. So they make things that are anti-inflammatory that float through your whole system and impact your entire body. So the first question is that you'll probably recognize if you've been in the app and filled out your anti-inflammatory food score. So we do ask a lot of questions, and this is one of them. How often did you eat a green leafy salad with or without other vegetables? So why we ask this question is because in our research studies, people who ate half a cup, not a lot, but just half a cup of green leafy vegetables or fresh herbs a day had lower levels of C-reactive protein, which is a measure of inflammation in your bloodstream. So when we saw that people who just ate that small amount had less, on a regular basis, had less inflammation in their whole system. And this is because leafy greens are a good source of phytochemicals. So you might have heard things like antioxidants and phytochemicals and flavonoids. I'm not going to get into what all those things mean. Just remember, phytochemicals are good. They reduce inflammation. Most of them are extremely anti-inflammatory in your system. So leafy greens, really, it's because they're a good color. And any fruit and vegetable that's a really good color tends to be rich in phytochemicals. And this helps promote diversity in the gut bacteria. So when we ask about orange or purple vegetables and blue, red, or purple fruit, again, you get a point if you're eating them once or more than once a day. And this is because these foods are rich in beta carotene. And we've seen in studies as well, other people have published this work, that foods that are rich in beta carotene are associated with anti-inflammatory compounds in the blood. We also see that these foods are also rich in carotenoids. That's what helps to make them orange and rich in color. And we know that what this does in the gut is it helps to improve the intestinal barrier. So on your intestine, you have a level of mucus, kind of like snot, and then you have a level of bacteria on top of that. And that's through your whole intestine, not just your colon. So what we don't want to have happen is we don't want you to lose the snot or lose the mucus layer, because when that happens, then the bacteria sits on the gut. The gut can get leaky because you have proteins that help those cells, those villi to be closed, and those tight junction proteins get open, or that you lose some of them. And then you can get dietary bacteria, as well as other things from the foods that you're eating, into the circulatory system. And that's one of the reasons why you get inflammation, because it's your body reacting to those things that are getting in, because your intestinal function isn't working like it's supposed to. So these foods are associated with helping that intestinal barrier to be healthy and stay healthy. They're also high in soluble fiber. And if you have inflammatory bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome, you may have been told not to eat a lot of fiber, but the diets that we use are high in soluble fiber. We do lower insoluble fiber, like the fiber from grains, at the beginning of when you're not at the beginning of following these diets. But we do try to increase the amount of soluble fiber you're eating, because what that means is that it helps you to grow that. It's food for that gut bacteria, the gut bacteria that we've identified that are good and that you want to grow in your gut. So it helps to feed those things. We also ask these questions. How often do you eat an apple or banana? How often do you eat a whole citrus fruit? And again, you get full points if you're eating one or more a day. So I always get asked by patients, can I juice it? Yes, you can juice it. So citrus juice is also a good source of phytochemicals that you can have. Now, you're not getting the fiber, but for some people that might be better at the beginning. Apples and plums, they're cheap. They're usually available year round, and they're one of the only good sources of pectin that you can eat. Now, pectin forms a gel in the gut, and again, it helps you to soften stool. It acts as a prebiotic fiber, which helps feed those gut bacteria. And we think that foods that are rich in pectin may form a unique barrier on your gut lining to protect entry from harmful bacteria. And so it's hard to find pectin. Pectin is in like the white stuff on oranges. It can be in apples. You can actually blend your apple whole and make it into applesauce. You don't have to worry about the seeds. They're an actually very rich source of pectin that you can have. And that makes an excellent snack for you, or an easy way to get in some of these foods. Bananas, you want to try to pick the greener bananas, are better, in my opinion, because they taste so much better, but they're higher in resistant starch, and they will also help feed that resistant starch. Acts like a prebiotic fiber, which helps, again, feed those healthy bacteria, which produce anti-inflammatory compounds. I did want to talk often about sweets as well, because we don't just talk about what you should eat, but I wanted to talk about some foods that particularly may trigger inflammation. So research has shown that if you switch your consumption from a low sugar diet to a high sugar diet, you will change your gut microbiome in 24 hours. I just thought that was so incredible. So we also know that if we can reduce added sugars, this is in people who are eating a lot of added sugar. If we can reduce that added sugar and replace it with some of the other foods we're talking about, like fruit, we can reduce inflammation in the system. So this slide is very, very busy, and really I only did it like this so that you would have notes. We'll send you the slides after the talk is finished so that you will have a copy of all this information. So I've put your limits there. You can identify who you are and where you fit in that group. 1 teaspoon of sugar is equal to 4 grams. So I had a box of cereal. Now I can't see the screen, so I'm assuming you can see it. This is cereal. I'm probably not supposed to show brands. I'll cover that up. This is cereal that I bought for my kids last week because I thought, oh, I want them to eat something that has fiber in it. And when I look at the fiber, it's not too bad. For a serving of this cereal is about 6 grams of fiber, not too shabby. But then when I look at the sugar amount, it's 11 grams of sugar in one serving. So if I look at now my chart, I see kids 16 to 18 grams. So I've given them their entire sugar content of added sugar. Hey, this is added sugars, remember. It's not the sugar you find in food like milk or in fruits and vegetables, okay? So I am giving in one bowl of cereal, my kids almost their entire sugar amount for the whole day. And this just helps to put into perspective how much we're used to eating things that are sweet, because I don't really feel that bad about this because then they eat breakfast, right? So it's then trying to minimize over the day other sources of added sugar and being conscious at least of things that we're putting in our mouths and reading food labels around that piece. So I did put a little bit of information here just to give you a reference point. A bottle of sweetened pop has about 11 to 15 teaspoons of sugar. Chocolate chip cookie has 50 grams. Muffins have around 30 grams. This is a small muffin, not a Costco muffin. And drinks like sweetened beverages at Starbucks or Tim Hortons have also a large amount of sugar. So these, I'm not saying don't ever eat these things, but they are treat foods. Not necessarily, we don't want to maybe say treat foods, but they are sometimes foods, not everyday types of foods. And we actually recommend to keep inflammation at a minimum, to only eat, have anything really super sweet less than 3 times a week. So you still can have these sweet things, but it is tricky. I've tried to do this. And I've had a lot of really poor experiments with low sugar jam, because I find the jam is always what puts me over the top, because I love jam on toast. So the next one, how often do you eat deep fried salty foods? How often do you eat a high fat processed meal? How often did you check the ingredient list of packaged foods to see if they contain harmful additives? So again, if you're eating these things regularly, you get subtracted points on your food score, because we know that these things all promote inflammation. Sodium, high salt promotes inflammation, even if you don't have to try to limit sodium just if you have high blood pressure. Trying to decrease the amount of sodium that you add or that you're eating in foods is good for everybody. So if something does say on the label that you're buying, if you can buy a low salt option, buy the low salt option. Even if you're sprinkling salt on it at the table, you're going to add less salt than what they're adding in the processing of those foods. If you eat meals at home, research shows us that then you are going to eat less fat, you are going to eat less sugar, and you are going to eat less salt. So we know that home-cooked food typically has improved diet quality, which is important. That's why we ask you the question about eating. How often do you eat outside of the home? Now, you can make lots of good choices outside of the home. I'm not saying that you can't, especially now if you live in a big city, there's so many salad places and Subway, you can make good choices, and other places you can make good choices. Although my kids did tell me last week, I didn't know this, and I argued with them and I was wrong, that Subway is actually not even classified as bread anymore, the Subway bread, because of how much sugar it contains. I know, I'm sorry to break your hearts this way. But I did argue that nutrition comment with my kids, and they won that one. I lost. So the other thing you want to try, if you're baking and eating sugar, using sugar, try to make stuff at home if you can. Find recipes that are easy. Try to use fruit-based desserts, like apple crisp, for example, versus something like apple pie, or even I'm trying to think, or a chocolate pie. Try to, incorporate fruit and fruit as much as you can as desserts. Get used to eating fruit without added sugar and fat as something sweet, or a little bit when you're craving sugar or you're craving sweet. If you eat a piece of fruit, it will often help get rid of that craving for you. So give that a try. We recommend, again, for all of these high fat or processed meals, deep fried, salty, if you can keep it, again, I'm not saying never eat them, but try to keep them to less than 3 times per week. People that do that have a lower inflammatory profile than people who are eating these more regularly. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about additives. So I've listed a few there. The research on additives is not entirely conclusive. A lot of the information that we have where we're seeing some of these additives promoting intestinal inflammation come from animal studies. So we do limit, especially in our FLAIR program, we take out all possible additives. But the one additive that is in this list here that we have definitive research on is carrageenan. And it's one of the only additives that's been explored in human trials, particularly in inflammatory bowel disease. And in people who are eating carrageenan on a regular basis have a higher rate of relapse. So that means it's promoting intestinal inflammation in the gut, and it's causing this an autoimmune response in the body. They have people who regularly consume have higher levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines or compounds in their bloodstream, but they also have higher levels of inflammation in their gut. And we measure that with something called fecal calprotectin, which if you are out there and have IBD, you're probably familiar with. So where do you find carrageenan? Okay, stop talking about it all and just tell you where you find it. So I have a few foods here that I pulled from my own fridge. Okay, where I see a lot of carrageenan is in a salad dressing. Anything that needs to be mixed and stay mixed together will often have carrageenan. Maltodextrin, I find in a lot of things that have a coating or salt, and they want the coating or the salt to stick to the cracker, to the chip. Almost all of those foods will have maltodextrin in them as well. Polysorbate 80 is found in a ton of things. I was looking, I'm going to cover up brands, but I pulled this out of my fridge and I found right away there's polysorbate 80 in it. And we also have a ton of carrageenan in this product. Milk products, again, I'll cover up brands, but this brand here, sour cream, is notorious. Cottage cheese, all typically have a ton of carrageenan in them. As you can maybe find 1 or 2 brands that do not, but typically it costs double what the other brands cost. So again, if you're using those things in limited amounts, I think that it's okay, but it's not something you want to be using in everything that you're eating. So if you're eating, store-bought salad dressing and sour cream and cottage cheese and other milk products that are staying, together, liquid milk is fine. Most cheese doesn't have any carrageenan. Yogurt. So I pulled out this yogurt, and again, I looked, and it made me happy. I must have looked at the grocery store because all it has in it is skim milk and active bacterial cultures. That is an excellent yogurt. Read your yogurt containers. Even the good brands that you think, oh, those help my gut microbiome, often have many of these food additives that we think are very harmful in the gut. So I want to briefly talk about protein. I've got about 5 minutes here before I want to get into my demo. So we're almost done. Stay with me. So every time I talk about beans, everybody rolls their eyes at me. I have been talking about beans for the last 25 years. I even did some work for the Alberta Pulse Growers at one time, or a grant with them, looking at why people don't eat beans and legumes. And this is a behavior that's really hard to shift in people. Now, with increasing costs of meat, a roast, I went to the grocery store last week, it cost $50. I'm like, forget it. So this is one way, if you're trying to incorporate some health into your food, but you don't want to incorporate cost, this is one of the best ways to do it. Now, I have a picture at the bottom there of red lentils. Red lentils are so good because you can put them in stew, you can put them in spaghetti sauce, you can put them in soup. If you, they almost completely dissolve in the food that you're doing, that you add them to. They take maybe 15, 20 minutes to cook. And they don't make it taste weird either. Like some legumes have a really strong flavor, like chickpeas sometimes can have a strong flavor. But my kids, honestly, they don't even know. When I first started dating my husband, he had to beg me. He said, Lorian, I don't know what you're doing, but stop putting in so much fiber, with tears in his eyes, because he was experiencing so much difficulty because of the amount of things that I'm able to hide in food and people don't know. So red lentils is one of my secrets. Some other good sources of food, again, you'll notice we do limit red meat. In our flare diet, we don't let you have any red meat for the first 6 weeks, and then we slowly add in red meat. And you'll notice as part of our food pyramid, we limit red meat to about 250 grams a week. I would also recommend, if you have access to wild meat like deer, or lots of people do have access to that, at least in the Alberta and BC areas. That is also an excellent choice. Anything that's grass-fed and grass-finished. What happens is when we feed our animals corn and a lot of grain to finish the meat, which makes it sometimes taste better, more what we're used to, that increases the amount of unhealthy fat in it and makes it so that it's more pro-inflammatory. So just be conscious of that. And for that reason, that is why we limit red meat to the amount that we do. If you're eating grass-fed, if you're eating wild meat, probably you could increase that amount slightly with no negative effects, because it doesn't have as much of that imbalance of fat in the meat. When we're looking, you guys have heard this. Everybody knows they should eat fish. I've listed the fatty fish there that we recommend to eat 2 times a week. If you can match your red meat intake with fish intake, we might have an entirely different population. Canada has some of the highest rates of autoimmune disease in the world. We have the highest rates of inflammatory bowel disease. We have the highest rates of multiple sclerosis and some other diseases. So it's important that we start to shift the way that we eat a little bit. And eating fatty fish helps to do that because of the omega-3 content in the fish. And I'm going to give you a tip if you hate fish. So in a few minutes. So stay tuned for that. For nuts and seeds, we want you to be eating these a small cupped hand 5 times a week. People say you're going to make me gain weight. I say, no, I won't. Research shows that people who eat a small amount of nuts, particularly the research has been done around walnuts, every single day actually improve their liver health, can help reverse liver damage in their fatty liver. Like if people have fatty liver disease, can actually help to reduce the amount of damage that they have in their liver. And walnut oil in particularly makes delicious salad dressing. So that's another thing that you can incorporate into your pantry. We do recommend to eat more white meat and eggs, as I mentioned before. Why? There's a few foods that we know are very related to colon cancer, and there's clear evidence that those relationships exist. One of them is processed meat, and the other one is bread mold. So don't eat moldy bread either. So we know that those foods are carcinogenic in the gut. So processed meat does count. I'm very sad about this because I grew up on sausage and bacon. So one way that I get around this is I eat freshly stuffed sausage that hasn't been smoked. As I do that as often as I can and feed my family that. Or sometimes I do pick the natural meats. They say they're lower in nitrates, that they actually they use celery salt and celery extract to process the meat. And so those may be a little bit better if you can choose the naturals brands and look on the list of ingredients. If it says celery, you'll know that that's one of the ones that we think might be a bit better, but we're not 100% sure. Now we're going to talk about fat. I've already talked a lot about fat because we think that this omega-6-3 ratio is one of the reasons we see these higher rates of inflammatory illness in our country. Omega-6 fat is found in things like soybean oil, sunflower, safflower, corn oil. When animals are fed corn, it really raises the amount of omega-6. Even if you look at countries that have more than 5% of their crops as corn or soybean, you see these higher rates of disease. You also see higher amounts of omega-6 in the meat, as well as even in things like butter, unfortunately, because butter is delicious. So what we recommend is to limit and try to get this omega-6-3 ratio down a little bit, is to increase the amount intake of monounsaturated fats. And what we're talking about there is change the oil you use. If you use primarily butter, if you're using coconut oil, those are both things that are high in saturated fat. And we don't think that they're as good for your heart. Now, especially coconut oil for patients with ulcerative colitis, there is a type of fatty acid in there that they have shown to be damaging to your gut. So coconut oil is not a good choice. We don't have evidence for that in Crohn's disease, but I would probably limit it if you have either of those diseases. Butter, we still recommend at least a tablespoon of butter in our flare diet, because butter and dairy fat has a type of fat in it that's beneficial, and it helps some of that omega-3 to actually, we think it helps to get that omega-3 absorbed into your system. So I'm not saying don't eat any butter, but I am saying, put it on your toast, maybe cook your egg in it, but your primary source of fat should be oils. So where, again, you may think, well, I use olive oil at home. I don't get all those other oils. If you eat salad dressing, if you eat any processed crackers, if you eat anything basically on the shelf that has fat in it, you are probably getting a oil or a type of fat that is high in omega-6. So I actually pulled out another couple of ingredients, and I did find, but if you read labels, you may be able to find. So I know there are salad dressings out there that are made with olive, canola, walnut oils, or extra virgin olive oil. So you just have to read labels. So I looked at this product and I bought the olive oil one. I didn't actually look at the label in the grocery store, but I pulled it out of my fridge and looked today. And the first two ingredients are canola and olive oil, and I couldn't believe it. I actually expected to see canola and olive oil, and then typically what you see right after that is soybean oil, because soybean is a lot cheaper. So I was actually pleasantly surprised when I picked out our mayonnaise, and I did see that it included the right types of oils. So when you are buying these things, look at labels. It's worth it to check if it has the type of oil that you want to help improve your health. Now, here's my tip around fish. If you don't eat any fish, you can add flax oil to your diet, 1 tablespoon a day. We do see in our patients who aren't eating fish, we still see their omega-3 acid, the omega-3 amount that makes up part of their red blood cell. We look at the actual red blood cell. One of our wonderful dietitians, Natasha Haskey, does this work, and she has seen that the amount of omega-3 shifts in the red blood cell from the diet, from one of our Flare diet program. And that's because we incorporate the fatty fish twice a week. And if you're not eating fatty fish, then we really encourage you to eat this flax oil. Now, a lot of people don't like flax oil and the way that it tastes. It is nice because it's pretty cheap at the grocery store too, where something like walnut oil is super expensive. So buy a little bottle. Try to mix it in things if you don't like the taste, but you might want to give it a try. I've talked a little bit about saturated fat already. You do lose points in our program if you're eating more than 1 tablespoon a day of hard margarine or butter or cream. And if you're regularly eating commercially prepared baked goods like cakes and cookies from the grocery store or deep fried foods also. Now, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen. And actually, I'll go through this quickly first. So I just want to show you that you will have information on this because I'm going to do a quick demo. So I'm going to show you how you can incorporate almost all of everything I just talked about from that food pyramid into one meal. And that meal you can prepare ahead of time on the weekend. You can put in your fridge. It lasts, and it's mason jar salads, and they last for 4 to 6 days. And when I was thinking about doing this today, because I'm going to make a couple for my daughter tomorrow for school, And I thought, it's so hard sometimes to do nice things for ourselves, but I feel like, oh, I'm going to take the time and do this for my kid. So, and I thought, you know what, that's a little sad. We need to do some nice things for ourselves too. So I just want to, when you're trying to think of some of these healthy behaviors, if you think about it in the positive, like, I am doing this for myself, I am doing this to support my health and make good choices. Making some of these choices, adding some of these foods into the way that you eat is something that you can do that's nice for yourself. So the mason jar salads, I have the instructions. I have recipes for some delicious vinaigrettes that you can use that are all anti-inflammatory, incorporate many anti-inflammatory foods and spices. And then I have what I've listed under optimal ingredients is some of the most anti-inflammatory foods that we know. So there was a study that was done and looked at hundreds and hundreds of studies, and it assigned scores to every different food components to look at if they're pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, and it balanced those things out, and because some foods are both, right? So this list that I've included here for you are some of the things that they identified as being most anti-inflammatory, particularly when the list here that I have of spices, vegetable or fruits, and leafy greens. All of these have phytochemicals in it that have documented evidence that says they are anti-inflammatory as part of this work that was done. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm just going to go off video for a minute while I move my camera. And I'm going to go like this so you can see what I'm doing. Okay. I was using collagen powder there as a stand for my computer. Okay, so I have got 3 minutes, and then I want to do the mindful eating activity. So we're going to see if I can do it. So I'm looking at the time. It's almost 4:40, so I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra time. So I have my mason jar salads. We're always going to do dressing in the bottom because then your stuff doesn't get soggy. So I am using garlic oil because my daughter has IBS and she gets a lot of gut pain. So I use garlic oil instead of putting in fresh garlic. Now, if you're using fresh garlic and you want to get all of the benefits of the fresh garlic, then you're going to want to use, let it sit before you add it to food. You want to let it sit for about 10 minutes in the open air, and it actually develops more beneficial compounds that they think to help prevent stomach cancer if you let it sit. If you don't let it sit, you don't develop the same amount of compounds, which is kind of neat. So all I just added as well is a tablespoon of oil, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, which I just researched because my mom asked, and it does have also some good compounds. I'm going to put a little bit of water in each one. So I do 1-1-1 with water, and I always did that to eat a little bit lower fat sometimes. I'm going to put a dash of maple syrup in each one because maple syrup also has some great phytochemicals in it in terms of a sugar. I'm going to put a little bit of Dijon mustard, and I did read the list of ingredients and it's pretty good. And I'm going to put in some salt and pepper. So I'm just going to do a little shake. Pepper is one of those excellent spices. Unfortunately, my daughter doesn't love pepper, so I'm just going to put a little bit in there. I wish I could put more in. The more pepper, the better. It's an excellent, excellent spice. Okay, I put my salt, pepper, water. We're done. So I'm just going to mix those up quickly at the bottom of my jar. Now, I am going to use legumes. So I know this is tricky. So all I did is I got a can of chickpeas, I rinsed them off. I'm going to grab a handful. I'm going to dump them in the bottom of each of the jars. What I find is legumes are way better if they're marinated, especially if I don't like even raw chickpeas unless they're marinated. The other thing you could also do is take this, dump it in the blender, blend it up. You're good to go. The kids will never know, I promise. I do it all the time. I think they're still listening to me somewhere. Okay, the next thing we're going to add is I'm going to add a couple nuts. I have some sunflower seeds here. They're not salted, but so I'm going to put them again in that dressing. just so they get a little bit of flavor in there. If you don't want them a little bit soggy, you want them still crisp, then you could put them a little later so they're not sitting in the dressing. The next thing I have on this list is you can add in some high resistant starch foods. This would be rice that's cooked and cooled, potatoes that have cooked and cooled, quinoa that is cooked and cooled. I do not have anything like that, so we're not going to do it. The next thing is vegetables or fruits. So I've got my chopper. Oh, you know what? I wanted to add one other thing. So I have a love affair with nutritional yeast. So you're going to think it's crazy, but there's lots of, this is not brewer's yeast. Do not get confused. This is nutritional yeast. So I'm going to take about half a teaspoon of that nutritional yeast. It tastes like Parmesan cheese, especially when you mix it with a bit of salt and a bit of garlic flavor. And it is so yummy. I use it even in my mac and cheese for the kids, and it's super high in vitamins. So it's just such a nice thing to add to salad dressing. Oh, I'm at 3 minutes. Okay, I didn't meet my goal. Okay, I'm gonna have to be super fast. I might just have to do one salad. I have a chopper because I find if kids use if I use a chopper, my kids eat stuff way more. So I'm gonna do some peppers. I'm gonna do a tomato, all these nice anti-inflammatory things that I have. I'm gonna do a couple radishes in here. Maybe I'll do one more tomato and some yellow pepper too, because it has that beautiful yellow color that we want to see. Okay, so easy, right? We've got our veggies here. I'm going to put them in the top like that. I'm only going to do the one because I don't think I have time. Then I have some spinach. I'm just going to rinse it up. I've got a couple different greens here to add. I've got spinach. I've got mesclun. I just get it out of the bag and I just put it in. I assume that it's been washed adequately. Some of you may make comments in the comment section about me doing that, but it's way easier. So that's what I do. And then I have in my garden, I got my son to pick me. I've got some Italian parsley. When you look under those spices, very small amounts of those spices will actually have a big benefit. And guess what? Dried count too, which is amazing because then you can use both. So I have some basil. I have some Italian parsley. It's been so freezing here. All my basil is going black, so I might as well use some of it. And guess what? I am done. I've got protein. I've got salad. Delicious. All she has to do is dump it into a bowl and she's good to go. The other thing I wanted to mention is if you do like fish, you can get the pre-flavored salmon or tuna. This is a dill and lemon flavor, which is my personal favorite. I don't like adding it to the salads because I feel like it's stinky then when I take it out and then it makes me not want to eat the salad. So I actually add it, will take it with my salad and eat it when I eat my salad. But again, this is the less expensive version of this. And I buy it because the expensive version has some of those harmful additives in it. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, really? And then I looked at the less expensive version and it had none of those additives in it. So that was, I thought that was a win. So look at labels because you can find good products. So, okay, that took me 5 minutes. Okay, we're still at 4:45. Oh, 4:46 now. And I want to shift now into the mindful eating. So I'm just going to stop my camera. Okay, and I'd like everyone now. So I'm going to leave my camera off for the duration of this activity. So I'm feeling a little bit like this has been high energy. So maybe not for you guys, but for me, this is the first time I've ever done a cooking demo in front with people on watching me, but not being able to see their faces. And so I want everyone just to get comfortable in your chair for a minute. I want you to plant your feet, feel your feet against the ground. I want you to get a raisin or a nut, something that you can feel and play with and suck on in your mouth that's not going to disintegrate. Maybe a Werther's candy. No, I'm just joking. Try to maybe get something like something that's going to stay together. So I want you to just plant your feet. I want you to take a deep breath in. Okay, so I want you to take the raisins or the almonds, whatever you have in your hand, and I want you to imagine that you have never seen this food before. You do not know what it is. Maybe you've come to Earth from a distant planet, and you have never seen this food. So you're trying to figure out what kind of food it is. Now, with this food in your hand, we're going to walk through an exercise that helps you to explore it with all of your senses. So focus on the food as if you've never seen anything like it before. Focus on seeing the object, scanning it, exploring every part of it. So you're actually looking at it visually. You don't have to close your eyes. Turn it around with your fingers and feel, what does it feel like? What is the color of this food? Notice how a raisin folds and where the surface reflects light, where it becomes darker. Next, you want to explore the texture. Feel, is it soft? Is it hard? Is it smooth? Is it coarse? Are there different parts that feel different about that thing in your hand? Now, while you're doing this, if thoughts arise like the first time I did this activity, like, why am I doing this? This is weird. I hate this. This is painful. How will this ever help me? I hate raisins. I want you just to see if you can acknowledge, don't ignore those thoughts. Say, I see that thought, and let it be. If you think about it, put it in a paper boat mentally and float that boat down the river. And you're going to have this river going by you the whole time you do this exercise. Keep just putting that thought, wrap it, fold it into a paper boat and let it float down the river away from you. Then you want to bring your awareness now back to the raisin. We are going to take the object and put it beneath your nose and carefully notice the smell of it. You're going to bring the object to one ear. You want to squeeze it, maybe not if it's a grape. Roll it around and hear if there is any sound coming from it when you squeeze it. Does it make any sound at all? Begin to slowly take the raisin to your mouth. Noticing your arm. How does your arm get there? Where does it go? Perhaps even become aware, is your mouth watering for that food to eat it? Gently place the object in your mouth. Put it on your tongue, but don't bite it. Simply explore, how does this object feel in your mouth? Roll it around, feel it against the top of your mouth with your tongue. When you're ready, intentionally bite down on the object. Maybe notice how it automatically goes to one side of the mouth versus the other. Also, notice the taste that it releases. Slowly chew this object. Does it make a sound? Be aware of the saliva in your mouth and how the object changes in consistency as you chew. When you feel ready to swallow, consciously notice the intention to swallow. Then see if you can notice the sensation of swallowing the food. Sense it moving down to your throat and into your esophagus as it moves it down into your stomach. Now take a moment, take a deep breath, and congratulate yourself for taking this time to experience mindful eating. I'm going to ask you just a few questions that I want you to think about that you noticed. So did you notice what the raisin looked like, what it felt like, how it sounded? Did it have a smell? What was its taste? Is there anything that surprised you about doing this practice? Did you have any thoughts or memories that popped up and were hard to put in the boat and float down the river while you were doing this practice? Was there some elements of this practice that you found challenging, difficult, or did it feel easy for you? And what was your experience of eating with such focused attention on a single object? And what was the relationship between what you thought eating and this exercise might be like and the actual experience of eating the raisin? Now, the first time I did this activity is my mind, when I tried to think about everything that was going on. I had so many thoughts that I had to put into the boat and visually see those cares and see those thoughts float down the river away from me. And I found it very difficult to slow down and keep my focus on the raisin. This is completely normal. And with practice and meditation, you will find it easier to bring your attention back to the moment that you're living in and back to your experience. I'd encourage you, if you go into the app, if you have access, we have a whole 6-week mindful eating activity that you can do. I would encourage you to do that. And doing this raisin exercise is one of the activities in there. And I'd encourage you to try that another time. And notice if the second time you do it, can you help your awareness be a little bit more on that raisin and a little less on the thoughts that are going through your mind? This is how we learn to eat mindfully. When you focus on how a food feels, what it sounds like, when you think, how does this feel in my mouth? Can I visualize it being swallowed, going to my stomach? You can notice what are the differences in taste that I feel or the sensations that I'm having. Try to be aware of the complex flavors, the temperature, and tune in to notice, how does this food make me feel? It's okay that food makes you feel pleasure. That's how we're designed to be. And pay attention to when you feel full and satisfied so that you can stop when you feel full versus continuing to go on past feelings of hunger. Try to practice to bring your full attention to the act of eating as often as possible. And with practice, you will learn how to bring this quality of attention to many different everyday routine activities. And this will help you to begin learning how to be present. Food and eating is just a good way to start because it's a good reminder of a time that we need to take to be present with ourselves and to enjoy the foods that we're eating. So I'm going to turn my video back on. And I'll put it on top of my salad here. Oh, just a sec, I turned it off. And Chelsea, I'm going to see if there's any questions that have come up in the chat. I'll turn it on here, or if you can, we've got about 5 minutes left. I'll maybe take just those quickly for questions. Are you still eating raisins?
No, I just finished. We've got 3. That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have 3 questions.
Okay.
So one person is wondering if you could explain a little bit further the 6-to-3 ratio in regards to the omegas.
Yeah. So the 6-to-3 ratio is the amount of omega-6 in your diet compared to the amount of omega-3 that you're eating. Now, omega-3 is a lot harder to get. So we get it in things like fatty fish is our best source. When we eat it from other foods like ground flaxseed or flax oil, it's harder for us to absorb because both omega-6 and omega-3 compete with each other. So it's like you have an elevator, and if the elevator is full of omega-6, omega-3 can't get into your body and have an anti-inflammatory effect. So even if we're eating more omega-3, so you've got lots of people trying to get in the elevator, if you haven't emptied out some of those people, that omega-6 in the elevator, it's going to be really hard for the omega-3 to squeeze itself in. So typically in North American diets, we can eat a ratio as high as 25-to-1. We see in some meat samples that have been tested, we see ranges from 1-to-1 all the way from 32-to-1 in depending on different types of meat versus grass-fed, grass-finished meat versus meat that comes from the US or meat that is finished with corn. Other ways you can decrease, like I said, your omega-6 is the types of oils you're choosing. So when we're increasing the amount of monounsaturated fat, which is different, monounsaturated fat is not omega-6 and omega-3. So, but when we're increasing those healthy oils, that also takes the place of oils that are really rich in omega-6. Now, omega-6 oils or foods that are really rich in omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. So that's, if we can get that ratio down, we get more of that omega-3 into the elevator going into the body. That has that then causes an anti, or helps for this anti-inflammatory effect to happen of the omega-3.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a great metaphor with the elevator.
Yeah, that's how I like to think about it. That's the only way somebody explained it to me and it made sense.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Another question is, can we take flax seeds instead of flax oil? This person tries to incorporate it in baking or salads.
Absolutely. The problem with flax seeds is grind them up because they're really high in fiber. And so unless you're chewing them very finely, you're not going to get the omega-3. So you have to, because often if you see flax seeds go out in and they come out looking exactly the same way, you didn't get the nutrients. So make sure that either you're chewing them really well or grind them up into more of a powder, just in your blender or whatever. You can buy it ground before you're adding it to things.
Okay, perfect. Then we've got another question about the mason jar salads. What can you use instead of chickpeas?
Hi, Bill. It's nice to see you. You come to all of our talks. So nice to see you here. So yeah, especially if chickpeas, if they bother you or you have some symptoms, you can use the red. If you want to try a legume, you can use the red lentils. You can use the white beans. I would recommend for you, or if you are having symptoms, if you have any symptoms from legumes, make sure you throw it in the blender and make like a creamier salad dressing with the legumes. For people out there who are trying to control appetite and control weight, white kidney beans have actually, they believe there's a compound in there that actually can help to decrease potentially appetite. So that is one trick for people who are trying to control weight. Now, if beans bother you and legumes bother you, there's lots of other choices. You could use, I could have used chicken. You could even just buy a chicken and shred it and put it in. You could use like the fish that I was kind of showing you and add it after. Nuts and seeds are also a great source of protein. If you feel like you want to get a little bit of extra protein, you could even add in some collagen powder into that dressing that you're making, a tablespoon of collagen powder, and mix it up. You could add almond butter to the dressing or peanut butter if you want something like maybe a Thai dressing that has a bit of, some rice vinegar, some peanut butter, and maybe some soy sauce. That's pretty high in sodium, but still it is tasty. You can mix that up as a different kind of salad dressing as well. So all of those different sources of protein are excellent if you don't want to eat legumes.
So many choices.
I know. And if you don't like legumes, then try to use nuts. So, they're not totally, nuts are very, higher in fat. Legumes don't have a lot of fat, but a lot of some of the nutrients are similar, like that you get from both different types of things. So try to eat a variety of nuts too. I think in my presentation, I said some of the nuts that we have the most evidence for are both walnuts and almonds, are excellent choices, but mix it up. You can totally mix it up. What about mustard oil? I have no idea. I have never looked, but I will look that up for you in terms of the omega-3 content, and I'll compare it to the amount of omega-3 in flax oil, as well as maybe the amount of omega-3 in olive oil. And we will send out that answer to you when we send out the slides. So Chelsea, you'll just have to remind me to do that. So, but a great question. I'm interested to know too. Thank you. Oh, thanks, Bill. And how about tofu? So I didn't talk about tofu, but it is in my notes. Tofu is really high in any type of soy is high in isoflavones. And thanks for asking this question, Vidya, because I've talked a lot about soybean oil and how it's bad. And so you might think, oh, all soy is bad. That is not true. Soy, especially for cardiovascular disease, there's some excellent benefits of eating a diet that regularly includes things like soy nuts, tofu, tempeh are all good choices. So what I like is if you're going to use tofu in a salad, cut it up into little bricks, use the extra firm so it doesn't go all yucky, and then soak it in the dressing. Super secret. but super effective. If you don't soak it in the dressing, it has zero flavor. But if you keep that soaking, even, I mean, those salads can last for 4 days. So delicious. The other thing that tastes delicious with tofu is adding in the dressing is adding nutritional yeast. Just a secret that I have identified as being absolutely delicious. You could even make like a creamy Caesar dressing if you wanted to use tofu in throw it in the blender with your other dressing. I think I have a Caesar dressing recipe in there that includes nutritional yeast, some anchovy paste. So if you hate fish, but you like Caesar salad, guess what? You probably like anchovy paste. That's one way to get some omega-3 in there without even knowing it. And you could add in there some tofu as well if you want the dressing to be creamy. And I would just try a little bit and then see if you like it, and then add a little bit more. It's a great source of protein, low in fat, high in phytochemicals. So you really can't go wrong. Oh, thank you. The marinated tofu recipe in the app is delicious. So I put that recipe in because that's the one I use all the time too. And my kids like tofu. Yes, surprise. They will not eat fruits and vegetables. I actually was the dietitian that wrote the first handout ever in Alberta for how to get your kids to eat fruits and vegetables. I was 21. I had no kids. And both of my boys, I did everything right. And my youngest son does not eat fruits and vegetables. So that chopper I showed you, completely instrumental to his health because I cut it up so small, he can't pick it out and he doesn't know what's in there. So, but they do eat tofu. That's one saving grace of them. My husband will not. So he just has to pick it out when he doesn't want to eat it.
That marinated tofu recipe transforms tofu for those who haven't tried it in the app. So good.
Yeah, it is really good. And it's cheap and it's such a good source of phytochemicals. It's such a good source of protein. So yeah, I would encourage anybody who maybe thinks I'm never going to try that, but give it a try with the app recipe for marinated tofu. And I just lost, oh, there you are. Sorry, I thought I lost you. Oh, I'm just looking, there's one more. If you need to go, please go. I know we're over time, but fill out your evaluations, please fill out your evaluations so we can know what other things to provide to you. And it just helps so much for us to give us some feedback. So as you exit, it'll automatically pop up with the evaluation. It'll take you less than a minute. Well, maybe the same minute that my mason jar salads took me 3. So I think it should just take you less than a minute. Okay, do we completely avoid spices or chili powder, or does it depend on totally personal tolerance? So chili powder, you'll notice if I go into my spice list here. So these were the most anti-inflammatory spices that study that I talked about identified. We don't have chili powder on there. We do have black pepper, but I do know that chilies and chili powder, again, have important phytochemicals in them. If you don't like it, don't eat it. If it does bother you, it's okay. You don't have to have chili powder. A really good substitute for chili powder would be something like cumin. Adding cumin in is an excellent substitute. You get almost the exact same flavor and mix it with something citrusy. So if you mix cumin with something like lemon juice or lime juice instead of chili powder, and some black pepper, you'll often get you can get a similar type of flavor, but without something that bothers you if it does, because spicy food, hot peppers, especially if you have inflammatory bowel disease and you're in an active, so it means you've got maybe some ulcers in your gut. Yeah, that could hurt. So I would try to avoid those things while you're in an active state of your disease. I think we got all the questions. So thanks everyone so much for coming. I really appreciate your time and enjoyed talking to you today. And please, again, give us some feedback on the session today. Nice to see you all and have a good rest of your week.
Bye, everyone.